Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old, an anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American republic?
Hello everybody. We've done a number of shows recently on how Donald Trump is wrecking America. It's hardly news, but there are other ways of thinking about Trump. My guest today, Peter Leyden. I've known him for many years. He was early on involved with Wired magazine. He's a man from Silicon Valley. He's written many books, given many speeches. And he's currently the founder of Reinvent Futures, and he's writing a book about imagining the future of America. And he's thinking in an interesting way. He's beginning to think, I think, that Donald Trump is unintentionally changing America, potentially even for the good. Is that fair, Pete?
I think it's fair, but you need me to explain it before people run with it and think I'm some MAGA true believer.
Yeah, if you were a MAGA true believer, you probably wouldn't be here. So you've got this interesting piece in The Great Progression, your Substack newsletter, about what you call a positive reframe of what Trump might be doing for America in the long term. What do you mean by this? What exactly is the long term? I know you're thinking in 80-year cycles on this thing.
Well, that's really long term, but actually this idea started occurring to me once the American public by, a relatively thin but still significant margin voted in Trump over Kamala Harris. And I'm, been here in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area for 30 years and kind of living in Blue America. And pretty much everybody I knew was completely freaking out and starting to and go into increasing panic around what was going on. But it kind of made me think and stop and kind of that I actually look at elections in America as there's some kind of crazy folk wisdom almost that comes out of these moments where Americans choose a path that might not be a super conscious way to go forward, that they're actually crystal clear on, but that there's a kind of gut feeling of this is the way the country needs to go. And I think that's also true with the referendums here in California, and we can go into why that is. But it often defies, at first, like, why did this happen? And so it is an idea that I've been thinking about for a while, which that there was a gut feeling in the American electorate that between Trump, a guy who had the potential to really kind of take down and attack essentially some of the core pillars of what America has been for the last 80 years. For example, the kind of Pax Americana. He was challenging that to roll back the Pax Americana with America as the global policeman. He was also challenging the idea of the big bureaucratic welfare state that has been the backbone of middle-class life for the last 80 years. He was the only one talking about a fundamental challenge to that and a way to dismantle that and to try to move beyond that. And Kamala Harris, and for that matter, all Democrats were essentially conservative in that way of like, don't touch it, don't dismantle it, don't pull back from any commitments. And I think Americans understood at that moment that, you know what, as tough as this is going to be, we got to go forward. And part of it is we have to let go of that past to open up the space of the future. Now, we can debate whether that's true or whether that's going in their heads, but that was the first way I started to think about this, is what was really going on in that election. And then it also has now developed into a full-blown theory, the way I kind of laid out, which I've done now in my Substack and developing for my next book here, The Great Progression. I'm trying to lay out this to people and to really consider from a big picture, long-term perspective, what Trump is doing could actually be positive for America, but not only positive for America, it could create an incredible opportunity, not for the MAGA folks, the Republicans, and the conservative movement, but in fact, it's opening up a space for Blue America, the Democrats, and what would be in the next generation of progressives. And that's the counterintuitive thing that I think people, when they read this piece, are it's why it's going viral. It's like people are going, that's an interesting idea.
So you're thinking of America in a systemic way. You're suggesting that the old is dying, the new hasn't been born, but we know there's something inevitable about some sort of newness eventually appearing. It's sort of taken in some ways from Antonio Gramsci's philosophy of history. What is dying, Peter? What old world is disappearing?
Well, I would say, put it this way, there's been these key junctures in history. In American history, they've come every 80 years, and we can go into why is that and why it happens. But the last time America essentially reinvented itself was coming off the Great War, the World War II, and basically coming off the Great Depression and the building of the explosive expansion of the post-war world, which in 25 years kind of remade America and set a model for the rest of the Western world. So that world that was created essentially was an incredible advance for its time. It did a ton of great good things for the next 80 years, but it has become increasingly long in the tooth, if you want to be fair, or it's just starting to get dysfunctional, or it's kind of way past its prime, however you want to think about this. And so what's happening increasingly in the last, you could almost say the last 25 years, we've watched that the kind of Pax Americana, America is the global policeman, defending the entire world, keeping everything stable, tamping down another world war. Great thing for the time, but in fact, it's overextending America. It's leading to kind of unbelievable trillion-dollar deficits. It's actually distorting what's going on in the world all over the place. It's just unsustainable in the long run from America's perspective, but it's also not even healthy for the world. Same thing with these big bureaucratic welfare states. At the time, they were great. They built out the middle class. They basically gave security and kind of the safety nets for kind of people to kind of go through the trauma of their lives and the growth of the economy and the shifts of what's going on in the modern world. Unbelievable improvement of what happened previously before that in America and throughout the West. But that too are getting bloated and kind of bureaucratic, and can't get anything done, and the money that's being allocated can't even get out of the field. I mean, it's a systemic problem that is just after 80 years, these things are just way, way, way past their prime. And I think so there's a kind of way to think of the old system is that when you look at it through the lens of the government. This is the way the right wing and Trump has been looking at it. It's like those things have to go. But it's not just that. From the left side, you could base this left to center side, say, the old system of carbon energy, of kind of, the internal combustion engine, the idea of industrial production that's throwing off plastics, but also kind of polluting the world and kind of screwing up the entire climate and the planet. That's also way past its prime. And so there's a sense of fundamental system change, just not at the core of the government, but at the core of the energy system, the core of the industrial economy, the global system of economics, which has led to these incredible kind of imbalances and inequality. That's past its prime. So whether you're on the right or the left, whether you're kind of a populist on the kind of left side, which is a Bernie kind of young millennial crew, or whether it's the working class kind of behind, the white working class, particularly behind Trump, there is a sense that that system that worked for 80 years is done. It's over. We have to move beyond it. It's not working. And the only candidate, you could say, and I would even say the only party that was taking that dismantling seriously, in this case, was Trump. And so in the end, they went with Trump. But that doesn't mean that what Trump is doing after the dismantling is he's doing the new way forward. He's doing the dismantling, and because of that, as painful and difficult and kind of catastrophic as that's going to be for so many constituencies throughout the country, he's going to pay he and his party and the conservative movement itself is going to pay a incredibly profound political price. People are going to hate them. They're going to go through so much trauma of that they're going to blame on Trump and that the Republicans, the MAGA, and the kind of conservative movement, that essentially it's going to open up the political space for the other side, frankly, the Blue America, Democrats, next generation progressives, not the old woke kind of identity politics crew, but basically a different generation that might have a chance, it's not inevitable, but to kind of build out of that crater and to build the systems that would actually work much better for these same constituencies. Take care of all the people in the world long run. That doesn't mean you have to do it in the bureaucratic way of the kind of, Social Security. You can take care of kind of, poor people's health care differently than, the old kind of Medicare systems and stuff. So it's not abandoning the values of taking care of old people and poor people and actually, helping working people get on in life. We can do that. We just do it in a different way, leveraging, I would also add, the next generation of technologies, which we can get into, which is particularly AI. I mean, do we really want to build the old system off of these crazy old computer systems of COBOL and, ancient code that Elon is in there trying to take a sledgehammer to? No, those systems why don't we start over in a new way, building clean for 21st century technologies with new kind of systems that are much more efficient, much more effective, and ultimately are going to do a much better job in the 21st century. That's the opportunity here that I think people are missing while they kind of watch the trauma of the dismantling of that old thing.
Yeah, we've done a number of shows, Peter, on this. We had one with the Atlantic editor, Yoni Applebaum, who has a new book out called Stuck, one with Mark Dunkelman, Brown University academic, on why we can't get anything changed. There's, of course, Ezra Klein, Derek Thompson's new book out on abundance. Everyone, including yourself, they seem to be in the same camp that America needs to change, and progressives, the problem with progressivism in America in the 2020s is it's become innately conservative. It's bound up in defending the status quo rather than in reinventing the country. Now, you're coming to this from Silicon Valley as a former editor at Wired, as someone all too familiar with new technologies. You've already mentioned AI. Is that ultimately how progressives can reinvent the future with new technologies like AI? Is that the secret sauce?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. Absolutely, there's a technological foundation I think we need to start from. But let's just even step back a little bit differently. I've been out in the Valley here for 30 years. I was kind of recruited to work with the founders of Wired, and I've been kind of up to my eyeballs in every tech wave ever since. The coming of AI is the biggest technological transformation I've ever come close to seeing. It's going to dwarf what happened with the internet, as big a deal as that was. So this is a monumentally huge step change for humans of now working with, intelligent machines. So there is a side of really recognizing the transformational capability of this next generation of technologies that is just, a starting point, I would say, which I do think progressives in general who have been kind of burned by kind of what happened with social media and Facebook and that kind of stuff are kind of gun shy right now. But I would say, as someone who really studies and sees technology, this is the real deal. This is a transformational technology that you could fundamentally build a lot of positive new systems that would work way, way, way better than what we've got. So there is a potential of technology I just want to go do. But I would even go further than that. I think there is a mentality, an entrepreneurial mentality that I've been surrounded by here in the Bay Area, in the Silicon Valley in the broadest sense, but the San Francisco Bay Area, which I think we can learn a lot from, which is one of the beauties of entrepreneurial kind of framework, is you don't get stuck in the past. You kind of let go of legacy systems. You look fresh at things with really fresh eyes, and you don't really kind of get caught up in, well, what's possible, or what will people let us do, or how do we incrementally do this or that, or how do we kludge together some minor evolution. You look at the situation. What's the problem to solve? What are the tools available now, the best tools available now, and with a kind of forward-thinking, design-oriented mindset, you say, how would we best solve this problem, given the tools today and the kind of systems and the knowledge of human beings and all the other things we know, scientific knowledge of the time. Look forward, don't look back. Don't get entangled in the past, get kind of thinking more transformation about the future. That attitude is one that has been incredibly successful for the technology industry, and just look at how these companies are dominating the entire global economy, and they're trillion-dollar companies, which kind of are just it's an astounding shift that's happening in just 25 years here. But I think it could actually be a good lesson for the broader sense of how would we reinvent the economy, how would we reinvent the society, how would we reinvent cities, how would we reinvent transportation systems, how would we there's a healthcare system, how would we reinvent the educational systems. There is a kind of an opportunity opportunity here to kind of have a very different beginner's mind and kind of open-ended entrepreneurial mentality towards how could you update all these systems for the 21st century, starting with these unbelievably powerful transformational technologies. First and foremost, AI, but there's other ones too. Clean energy technologies, bioengineering now, what we can do with bioengineering living things and synthetic biology. There's a ton of these new tools now that we can really redo things fundamentally different with a progressive mindset, with a set of values looking out for the kind of old people, young people, poor people, working class people, to kind of build a very different systems that work better for everybody over the long haul. I think that's the opportunity that most traditional progressives and most traditional Democrats, and particularly the aging septic, whatever, the aging kind of class of the Bidens, and for that matter the Pelosi's, and the kind of 80-year-old crew and the late 70s crew, including Trump, are completely missing, is that there is an opportunity here for a next generation of progressivism built on the next generation of technologies that could really fundamentally reinvent America and actually set a model for the world. I mean, if that sounds crazy now in the midst of this Trump thing, just think that think bigger, think more with a longer lens, and think what someone in 50 or 100 years from now going to look back at what's going on here. The big picture is we're dismantling an old thing that had to go. We're just starting to build a new thing, and the new thing is going to be built on 21st century technologies, not 20th century ones.
So I take your point, Peter, and I don't think anyone would disagree with this broad view. But some people might say this is all very well. The first technological innovator to come at this is Elon Musk, whose Doge organization seems to be decimating the state, laying off civil servants and essentially not replacing them. You've noted that the old welfare state, the FDR New Deal, is going away. That was the old system, and it needs to be replaced by something else. If the Trumpian version is a kind of, I don't know how you would call it, some people would say a kleptocratic state, where a group of rather corrupt entrepreneurs or wannabe entrepreneurs are in a Putin-esque way seizing the assets of the state. What can progressives do that offers a third way, rather than just the kleptocracy of the Trump regime, or the old-fashioned centralized New Deal of traditional democratic rule of the FDR world? What's the third way? What does it look like?
It's a great question. Let me be clear here. So what I'm not saying, for example, I've been part of, you could say, the left of center tech world. I'm left of center tech and have been for 30 years since coming to Wired. I was also involved deeply in the early Obama years. I actually was involved in his first campaign. I actually was kind of all entangled in what was essentially the Obama tech world, where 80% of the tech world was probably more Obama side, and there was always this 20% libertarian right-wing side. What's happened now, I will say, for most of my 30 years, it was like 80% is left of center tech, 20% kind of right of center tech, libertarian. What's happened recently is with this advent of AI in particular, and with essentially, I would call it the old school factions of the Democratic Party, the academic left, the identity politics left, the kind of old school politics left, Biden and his kind of the whole regime, his whole many of his whole administration. There's been essentially you didn't understand what was happening fully from the tech perspective, and so what's happened is you've watched the tech world look at what are the political options out there. Is there this kind of stasis, protect the old thing, Dems, or is it this kind of crazy wrecking ball Trump? And right of center tech, which used to be the 20%, said, damn it, we're just going to hook ourselves onto that Trump train, which has at least a shot of winning. And if they have a shot of winning, we can basically kind of take advantage of that. That was Elon, Andreessen, that whole crew, Sachs. They made their move only in recent times. By the way, it's only happened about a year ago. when they saw the opening. Then there's been this kind of leftist center tech that is kind of frozen, more like a deer in headlights. They haven't actually come up with a kind of an alternative way to think about how to use government to kind of take advantage of this.
Well, some of them have been giving it a lot of thought for many years. Tim O'Reilly is a
When I say I love Tim, and there is a crew that's starting to piece this together for sure. But I'm saying it isn't kind of grabbing the reins of the Democratic Party. It's not kind of leaping to the forefront of what we can do. It's starting to change. So what's happened, I will say, in the tech world, literally in the last year, is you watch, because of the pro-tech moves of the tech right, you're watching the 80% is growing to about, I would give it a 40%. And because a lot of the young people are realizing, if you look ahead politically, we have to kind of go with the right side, as bad as that is. And so, but what I actually feel, and you're kind of, this is getting back to your point of it, as I think what is starting to happen now is you're watching the leftist center tech, the counterbalance to the right of center tech, and the right-wing tech of Elon and them, I think is starting to gear up now. And I think there is going to be a kind of a pro-tech, pro-growth, pro-abundance, from a tech point of view, agenda that is going to be coming together, that's going to try to make the most of AI, make the most of clean energy technologies, make the most of bioengineering too, which gets a little bit down the road when that's going to hit. But basically, we're going to start to watch an alternative to the Elon way to go. And it's going to be, how do we actually take these? Now, I'll give you one example. Elon is just taking a sledgehammer to the thing. He's taking it, whatever you want to call it, the kind of the chainsaw to the whole thing. That's the dismantling. That has nothing to do with basically the rebuild of how to actually do it right. And if he's trying to strap in AI in there somehow just to cover body count. I think what's really needed is the party of government, the party that actually believes in government, the side that actually believes we need a counterbalance to the market and big business, which is the Dems and the progressives, have to come up with an alternative that could actually say, it's not just about the dismantling, the replacement, far from it. It's about how do we leverage these things to accomplish the same things, if not more effectively and more efficiently going forward based on these new technologies. And I think that's what's missing right now, is that pro-tech, pro-growth, you could say, kind of way forward for the Democrats and the progressives. But I do think it's just getting started. I think that's what's going to come up. And I think by the midterms, you're going to see a really rigorous policy discussion around this. And I think ultimately by the next presidential term, there will be a flat-out, full-throated way forward that's going to be built on the next generation of progressive thinking around the next generation of these new technologies.
But Peter, what does it look like? It seems to me as if most progressives still think that technology can be utilized by the old state. We save the bureaucracy and we have more efficient AI and biotech and all the other technologies that are changing the world. Could it actually be bound up in the re-architecting of government itself? Musk and Trump clearly want to get rid of the state. They want to minimalize it or just destroy it. Is there, again, a third way? Is it more local, more state-based, more individual-based? What exactly does it look like with these new technologies? Or do we need to think of the network effect? You've been around Silicon Valley since the birth of the internet. Is the idea of the network intrinsic to this third way?
Well, let me frame it this way a little bit. You get the seeds of all this. And by the way, we're at this stage of the rebirth of the new thing is beginning. So the rebirth of the next thing is happening now. So it's hard to actually, with clarity and just kind of make a convincing case of exactly how we're going to do it. But one of the things I think anyone outside of the Bay Area has to understand is what is happening with AI is a fundamental step change in the capability of human beings, and it is a threshold that there's no going back from once we go across this. And what is happening is we are up previous to now, anything to do with intelligence, anything to do with sensing the environment, making reasonable understanding what's happening or what could happen, and making decisions about it, always had to have a human brain tied to it. Even the simplest task around intelligence had to do that. We are now making a crossing a threshold Or we have machines that are going to do that as well as humans, if not better, and in better and increasing amount of tasks. Not all tasks, but increasing amount of tasks. And we are going to watch an unbelievable resorting between what our humans going to do and what our machines going to do around the reworking of pretty much all systems. And if that sounds just crazy, I mean, this is like when you hear the founders of these AI companies talk, it sounds like they're talking science fiction. There are those of us who would watch this closely is say there is a lot of truth to what's happening here. We're crossing the threshold. Now, if you believe that, as I do, and as people in the Bay Area here do believe, pretty much once you kind of rocket what's going on here, you can actually look at almost any system and think, how could you do that fundamentally different? I'll just give you some very simple ones that anyone can even think about. Education, is also one of those old systems that has just been floundering for it was doing great in the post-war years, and we built out schools and universities and it all kind of worked, everyone's in college, but it's just increasingly kind of breaking down. You could imagine now a system built from the ground up right now with a kind of essentially personal tutor for every kid at every stage of their lives that follows them through life, goes through, including college, including through every stage of your work life. You could transform at a relatively low cost, essentially a completely different way of understanding how we're going to educate kids. There'll still be teachers, there'll still be mentors, there'll still be people doing social schools, all kinds of stuff that humans will still do. But we could dramatically and radically alter education. And Saul Kahn and others who are kind of pioneering this are kind of all over this stuff. But you can go in any direction this is going to happen, including government. Including how could we actually facilitate all these programs? How could you get money from this person to, from the kind of central pool of money to the person on the street and he is homeless? How could you, all kinds of systems could be done very differently with, high-speed interconnected computers and driven by AI, to compare it to a kind of human-led bureaucratic system of kind of, down through the channels to kind of get that same thing with a kind of, a physical office standing there signing your physical check. I mean, that was built for the 80 years system. There's a totally different way to go. And so what I'm just trying to say is we're just starting this fundamental shift and wrapping our head around the biggest idea, the strategic shift that's going on, which is, oh my God, we could actually do this very, very different. Same thing with defense. I mean, do you need $800 billion defense budget with giant, ships, aircraft carriers all around the world? Or do you need kind of an AI lightweight focused thing with drones and all kinds of other ways to defend yourself? This is why at every field and every industry and every kind of area now we're starting to have to think, oh my gosh, are we doing something different? And that gives, from the point of view of an entrepreneurial mindset, kind of a Bay Area focused mindset is, oh my God, the opportunities are immense. We could actually start over. We could do this right. Not start over like total scratch, but we could bring a different design attitude towards what's this juncture we're in. And I will just go this, and you talked a little bit about this 80-year cycle in American history, and if we want to go down that route, we can do that. But America has totally reinvented itself in 3 separate periods of American history. Weirdly, they happen about every 80 years, and there's a bunch of reasons for that. But we did go through a fundamental reinvention around new technologies coming off the Great War, the World War II, and it was an explosion of innovation through the whole economy, society, government, local, state, federal. The whole thing just went through an explosion of activity. Also, similar thing went on in Europe, but I'll just say from the American perspective, huge. We did a similar one coming off the Civil War, rebuilt America off the Civil War, and we mentioned it. We did originally the original one coming off the Constitutional Convention. We basically exploded into innovation around what was America back then. America has gone through these unbelievable moments of reinvention, and I'm arguing we're in it another one now. And part of it is driven by, there's all kinds of reasons, but one of the main drivers of why this happens is America faces an opportunity with fundamentally different technologies, transformative technologies, that essentially have hit the point where they can actually do many things way different than we previously did them. And it just happens that Americans love technology, they love to innovate, and they seize these things pretty early, and they jump on them, and they do crazy stuff with it. And I think we're about to enter another one of those crazy periods of reinvention yet again.
I don't think anyone would argue about that, Peter, but a lot of people are going to be watching and listening and thinking, this is all very well, but who owns the technology? We were promised all this about the internet, and we woke up one day and we found these multi-trillion-dollar companies like Google and Facebook and Apple control our lives. Many of us are unhappy with that. Even the government, even Trump is unhappy with that. There are all sorts of antitrust cases going on. In this, what some people might think of as a brave new world, borrowing from Huxley's famous 20th century book, you talk about defense and the replacement of the old state with innovation, but shouldn't we be fearful of Palantir, for example? Or shouldn't we be fearful of OpenAI when it comes to AI? You've got these immensely powerful tech companies that are focused on their own self-interest, their own profit. They're for-profit companies. I mean, AI is a bit murkier than that. So from a progressive point of view, I take your point on the innovation. I take your point on the not defending the past. But can we trust the titans of Silicon Valley, the Sam Altmans of the world? I mean, nobody trusts Musk, obviously. That almost goes without saying. I don't want to turn this into a conversation about Musk. Yeah. But let's take someone like Sam Altman. He talks the language of progressivism. But can we trust him and OpenAI with our future? Won't it just turn out to be history repeating itself, and more powerful tech companies mining our data, exploiting us while they become richer and richer, more and more powerful?
Well, it's a good question, and let me give you my answer to this. I know for a fact that you and I did a conference in Europe, if I recall right. I think it was in Paris once, where we had Carlota Perez there, the Venezuelan kind of British economist who is famous for...
iconic, who's very influential in thinking in cyclical terms as well.
Okay, so let's I use her, and I think about her a lot in terms of, again, I've met her, and as you have, and talked with her and absorbed a lot of her thinking. But one of the insights that she comes up with is that every time you come to these eras of kind of the arrival, essentially, of a transformational, game-changing, world-changing technology, a general-purpose technology that just gives humans a step change and really ends up dramatically changing all the systems around it. And this has happened periodically, again, on kind of long-wave cycles, which we can go into. But she says every time you see that, she accurately says what happens is the early stages of it, essentially the stage where you're essentially kind of figuring it out, ends up in a gilded age where the entrepreneurs that basically, the entrepreneurs that are essentially first on the technology are in a position to make fabulous kind of fortunes, who gain incredible power. And in fact, they come to this point where it requires, and historically has always ended up at this stage, at least in American history that I can see, a response from the people, the government, the state, essentially, to kind of harness that technology, constrain and contain the kind of handful of entrepreneurs who are kind of at the peak of that gilded age, and then they transform the system into what crosses over into what she calls the golden age. You go from the gilded age to the golden age. And the golden age is when you actually have some kind of muscle from the state shaping essentially how that technology can work and work better for everybody and move through the system, and kind of also the spoil of that system, the wealth that's generated off those new technologies can move through the system differently. And so you watch this transformation happen. And she goes back through all these different historical junctions. We saw it, in the classic Gilded Age in the United States in the late 19th century with the robber barons. The state came in with the progressive era and kind of ratcheted that down and came up with, income taxes and trust busting and all kinds of stuff that constrained the kind of voraciousness and the power, essentially, of those gilded robber barons. We saw it happen in the wake of basically the Civil War, basically coming off the kind of the Reconstruction. Once you kind of got rid of the essential robber barons, the slave owners, the kind of huge land-owning states that came into the Civil War, you reworked the thing, and even though there was some difficulties getting some of those things figured out in the Reconstruction, there was essentially a rebuilding of America around a whole different set of principles. But we leveraged, we constrained the Gilded Age powers to kind of transform it into the kind of more democratically enjoyed and kind of wider spread prosperity for the whole society. I'm confident that we can do this today. It doesn't mean we're going to basically do it, because at these junctures nothing's inevitable. But I think we're actually entering that piece. And I think what's interesting to happen is both, by the way, both right and left are very suspicious of big tech. I mean, you don't see Trump dismantling this kind of, the antitrust suits against Google and Facebook. And, a lot of these are just, they're hitting right now. They started with the Biden administration from, you could say, the kind of leftist center kind of antitrust, but they're being continued basically from to the right side. Doesn't look like they're going to dismantle them, because there is something healthy from both perspectives of kind of constraining those Gilded Age monsters. But the question is, how do you transition the power of those technologies out of the hands of these people that are in control of them now fully, much more fully, and how does it transition into a more widespread kind of beneficial kind of way to use these technologies? That is still ahead of us, but I feel confident we're going to be able to do it, and I'm starting to see, I think a lot of people are thinking about it, and you're starting to see that be the discussion that you've mentioned of even people here. We're starting to think, well, we need to do this or that. We're not really kind of getting into the next level of how would we totally reinvent these systems going forward, but we get the Ezra Klimes and others saying, yeah, this old system's in the way, we got to change it this way, we got to do that. I just think we haven't taken the next level, which is, okay, what are the next systems we're going to build, how are they going to be built, and how are we going to ensure that the Gilded Age class, the robber barons of our own era, are going to be constrained, and kind of we're going to ratchet essentially the power of the forward motion of those systems into the hands of essentially democratically elected people. Now, whether that'll be federal level, state level, local level, all the above. The progressive age wasn't just, the president doing a few things. It was a kind of crazy amount of innovation going at all levels of government, all through the country. And I think we're going to probably run into something like that very soon. And in fact, I think it's starting to get dawn on people that we're starting to move into that direction now.
Well, could you be a bit more concrete? Because I have to admit, I'm not entirely convinced. Firstly, in a way, you're saying everything's going to change, but in a way, you're also saying that history is repeating itself, that you have these all-powerful private companies. We're going through another Gilded Age, and we need a new kind of government intervention, antitrust initiatives that will control these increasingly powerful companies. So what's different about the 2020s from the 1920s or the 1930s? And where's the evidence that stuff's changing? You mentioned Ezra Klein. He's pessimistic. No one's seeing anything concrete. Is it in political initiatives, citizen assemblies, restructuring American democracy? Is it in cooperative movements? Where's the evidence, Peter, that something concrete is changing? A third way, not just going back to the New Deal.
I would say this. I would say, he's that leader and that kind of agenda and that book. It's not like I'm at this point where we can point in that kind of level. And I would say the same thing would have happened in, 1945 or 1865 or, any of these other junctions of American history. What is evident now is crystal clear now is the consensus, you could say, whether it's a populist left, Bernie level kind of crew, millennials who were kind of trying to get their kind of way in the run-up of the last 10 years, and now with exasperation, they're still running around the country and drawing these huge crowds, or whether it's the kind of Trump-induced populism from the right side. What is true is the energy to kind of bring down the old system and get beyond it is clarified. It's happening now, which is a big enough deal at some level. I mean, we want to walk and chew gum at the same time, but there is a huge shift in what's happened in just the last 6 months. We wouldn't have had people talking like at this level of kind of historic change even 6 months ago before the election, but we're watching that kind of thing clarify itself. What is not super clarified is what is going to come next. But it is every single one of these junctures, the next thing to emerge was not fully baked and kind of well thought out and kind of came into those junctures with, here's the plan, we're going to go. But it essentially creates the opening for the next generation of all these people to do it. And I would just say the encouraging thing I'm watching now is people like, Gavin Newsom, for example, or Ro Khanna, or there's a lot of these kind of emerging, who you'd say are leaders on the kind of left of center side of things, are not snapping back into just defending the old thing and not just saying, oh yeah, we just got to shore up the old Social Security once we get back in power. Oh yeah, we got to just restore AID the way it was done. They're basically I would say the people that are most forward thinking or most future oriented are actually listening now deeply. They're starting to rethink their positions, and you're watching a lot of new ways forward. And even in the local politics here, and we're in the Bay Area here, but basically there's a next generation of these kind of up and coming mayors, the new mayor of San Francisco, the new mayor of, relatively new mayor of San Jose. They're kind of a tough-minded, forward-thinking, get tough on crime, go forward. They're starting to rethink things, and they're actually starting to kind of firm up the nascent beginnings of these new agendas. Is it fully baked? Is it kind of, here's the thing? No. But this is the beginning of that stage, and then we have the space cleared now to think big, broad, clearly, in ways that we didn't have even 6 months ago. You couldn't have gone out into the field, before this last election, it's the same way in the left to center and come up with this crazy ass kind of like, let's rebuild everything around AI. Those kind of things, or even kind of ways that, we've got to dismantle the old systems. You couldn't even talk like that. But now here we are, post-election 6 months, or not even 6 months, and that's a conversation. It's not only just, hey, what would happen if we did this? It's like, what are we going to do to rebuild this after this kind of destruction? But again, this is my project that I'm working on now through Substack, my ultimate book, and I'm having a series of events around this thing, is I'm trying to capitalize just like you. I want to see those clear answers. I want to see those key leaders that are taking the way forward. I want to see more systemic treatments of like, how would we really rethink this at a fundamental level? I just think we're too early in the phase here, and we have another discussion in a month here, or not a month, but maybe a year from now. I think it'll be much clearer. And I think in the 2020 midterms, you're going to see a much sharper kind of understanding of what comes next. And I think by the next election of the president, you're going to see fully baked, complete kind of ways forward. That'll be much more radical than the kind of discussions we've had in many of the presidential elections leading up to now. And that's the same way it actually happened at every one of those junctures. They basically, once the card is tipped, once the old systems are dismantled, once the furious kind of populist backlash is absorbed, then you start to have to sift through the wreckage and start to think, what is the way forward? Those ways forward, by the way, are almost always built. In fact, I would have to say almost always built by what we would call, in political science terms, a progressive side, a kind of innovative side, a pro-progress, a pro-forward motion, a pro-innovation side, not a conservative side that tends to harken back to old systems, shore up the old thing, be cautious, all the kind of things that we associate with conservatism. So weirdly, even though people are thinking, oh, blue America, progressives, Democrats are in the hole, I think if you're going to see the new way forward for America, it's probably going to come out of that. Who exactly? Hard to point out now, but it's emerging.
There's also, Peter, we haven't talked about yet, the international dimension. In your 80-year cycles, 80 years ago in 1945, when the Second World War ended, Europe had destroyed itself. America was in a remarkable position. It was the dominant power in the world, and the last 80 years have been one of American hegemony of one kind or another. Today in 2025, though, you have China. I do another show, a weekly show with Keith Tier. That was the week he has a tech newsletter. Last week we did an interesting show which revealed that the Chinese are investing much more successfully around the world in architectural projects, especially when it comes to rare minerals, investing in local communities, Africa, the rest of the non-industrial or the developing industrial world. So something has changed. When you compare, Ezra Klein talks about this in his book, Dunkelman also in his book, one of the astonishing things is the success of the Chinese, for example, when it comes to high-speed rail. We're speaking in San Francisco, where there's been a fundamental failure of the state to even build a high-speed rail connection between San Francisco and Los Angeles. It's been a complete catastrophe in economic and political terms. You talk about America waking up, realizing these things, but there are still a lot of architectural challenges, and some people might argue in 2025 that America has already lost the race with China. Maybe the Chinese political system is in some ways problematic. But when it comes to economic development, especially this next wave of technological innovation, solar power, AI, the Chinese are already steaming ahead of the United States. So what about the historical dimension? Great powers don't last forever. America had a great run, 100 years. Now is the time for China.
Well, I know you're a Brit, and I'm married to a Brit, so I spent a lot of time thinking about England and the Brits. There is a scenario you can say that the United States kind of got fat and happy, had their run, and basically is unable to kind of innovate its way forward in any fundamental way to kind of regain or to kind of maintain their essentially hegemony or their essentially key leadership in the world. That is a way you could argue. I'm not going to argue that because I don't think that's not going to happen. But I do think there's a legitimate way you can think about that, and that is one scenario that's possible. That's what happened. We've run out of gear, run out of steam. I would, though, challenge you a little bit about your framing of post-war. Yeah, the Germany and Japan were flattened, but you forget that the Soviet Union was a formidable foe, and they had the same.
Perhaps in political, certainly in military terms, but not in economic terms.
Even at the time, I think you were losing track. We look at it back through the lens of, the deterioration of the Soviet Union. But after coming off that war, there was absolutely a debate going on in the world, whether kind of the Western-led, bureaucratic, centralized state-channeled industrial policy, which the West and the Europeans did, was going to actually beat the kind of more centralized, more kind of, focused, kind of centralized, kind of build out of the economy and build out of an industry. And the ideology that they had was essentially very compelling to the developing world, the post-colonial world. It's like half of it just went for it. Said including China, by the way, the early China. I mean, so there was a worldwide battle with a superpower that, at the time at least, was really a daunting challenge, and also potential for war around nuclear bombs and all that too. And they did beat us into space, and they did beat us in a few fronts here that freaked us out. So I just would say it's not that strategically different in terms of geopolitics. Now, I would give you that today's China is a much more sophisticated, much more kind of difficult competitor to what even the Soviet Union was there, but certainly what the Soviet Union became. So there is something there. But here's what I would just say about this is I'd be cautious to bet against American innovation, or broadly speaking, Western innovation over Chinese innovation or the Chinese system. And I think to really crystallize this, I think it comes down, you can even use it through the lens of AI. There are two superpowers in the world right now in AI. One is and it is the United States, by the way, is ahead of China in AI. Absolutely, for sure, almost across the board. There's a few kind of, DeepSeek does something to rework it a little bit here. But as of now, absolutely, we are ahead. But the second absolutely is China. Those two visions of what a world with AI on those two terms, with those two systems, is a very different world. China is going to take AI and make it absolutely top down. They're going to use it as a surveillance society. They are going to clamp down on watching everybody at all times and basically be able to kind of keep the kind of power of the Communist Party and those at the very top. Xi himself is going to be essentially extended. And that model, though, adopted around the world, is going to lead to centralized, autocratic, if not totalitarian states. As crazy as it is in the United States with all the kind of craziness of our politics and our pluralistic, open society of discussion and democracies is a preferable way to actually work out the future of AI. And the AI future of us, although there's some dangers of centralized control of a few tech companies or a couple, certain things, the actual probability of what's going to happen is a very decentralized kind of pluralistic way of the technology, but also how the economy works, how economic power coalesces, and how political power will kind of stay kind of open to change. Again, in a big picture way, there's Trump here now, and whatever, there'll be things. But those two fundamental systems are going to be at it again, just like they were at it at the end of World War II. And we basically watched 80 years, well, not 80 years, about 50 years there of a Cold War. We may be in something like that with China, and that's kind of the way people are thinking around AI right now. Both parties on our side kind of coming together, essentially, on how do we deal with China and AI. But so I would just say, I wouldn't count America out yet. And I would say this, it's something I haven't really written up yet, but I'm going to do so, which is one of the things that people from afar, particularly Europe, looks at us and they just think, what the hell is America doing to itself? And there is a kind of side that is just, are we out of our minds? But there's another side of it, it's like, this is kind of what Americans do. They are crazy enough to kind of disassemble the entire system that they've been squeezing the juice out of for a while, to kind of start over to try to do it better again. And it seems a little idealistic. It's worth considering that what's happening now is without a civil war, full-out civil war, without essentially building out of the destruction of a world war, it is possible that as traumatic as this transition with Trump and that is, there is essentially an opening happening here where America is going to try to reboot itself, get out of those old systems without destroying them in war, get out of those systems without a civil war with one side or the other winning, and basically they're going to reconstitute a 60-40 majority that always comes off of these junctures to rebuild a different kind of system that will thrive in the 21st century, that'll actually work better for more people over the long haul, and that could provide a model to Europe in ways that eventually Europe can roll your eyes now and thinks, how can anything good come out of this? It is possible it will. And here's the funny thing about it. There's no way Europe is going to innovate the way forward into a fundamentally different system. They can barely eat their way incrementally ahead, incrementally by this or that. What would have been the Biden, Kamala, old Democratic Party way forward also wouldn't have had enough in it to kind of reinvent America in any kind of fundamental way. They would have just kept adding programs and squeezing the juice and tweaking it here and there to keep the damn thing going. And so that wasn't going to win it. So if from a Western point of view or a non-Chinese point of view, you want to figure out where would you look for the way forward with these next systems, I think you still got to give the best chance at it in America. And if you're in America looking at where is the innovative space of America that you start looking for, it's California. Still, not Texas, but California. As gummed up as we are with process, it's still where tons of innovation goes. And ultimately, I think you look for Northern California. And I think what we're going to start to see is a generation of political leaders, which are not as well known beyond Gavin in our system here, to those outside the country or let alone outside the state. But there is a next generation of tough-minded, entrepreneurial, innovation-focused leaders that I think are going to be really interesting to watch in the next 4 years. And I think with that, I'd say do not bet against generally human ingenuity, but American ingenuity at these junctures, and don't actually bet against California. I'd also say, for those of you outside of the state, if there's one place on the planet I'd be looking right now to see what's this new way forward, a fundamentally new system-wide fundamental changes to go forward, I'd say look at Northern California right now, and at the very least keep an eye on this place, because I think a lot of interesting stuff's going to happen very fast.
Well, I hope you're right, Peter Leyden. How do people keep up with your work? I know you've got a Substack page, The Great Progression. How do people keep up with all your work?
Well, I mean, my name's Peter Leyden, and it's Leyden. You can go to peterleyden.com, which is everything about me, including a lot of my speaking. I do a lot of public speaking. You can also go to Peter Leyden at Substack, which is essentially my Substack, which is called The Great Progression 2025 to 2050. And I purposely add the Great Progression 2025 to 2050 is trying to think through the next 25 years of how this is going to play out and could play out. And that's being developed into a book that you'll be able to get at some point here soon. But those are the ways to follow me and all the normal social stuff, but you'll find that through my website. I'd love to keep in conversation with you.
Well, it's a pleasure, honor to have you, Peter, on the show. You and I have crossed swords many times at conferences.
Many times, and this is a good
we'll
conversation.
have to do it again. I know
will.
you've got some live events, and we'll get you back on the show because this conversation is only just beginning. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thanks.
He's an